Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Black, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We're a group of 8 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism to psychotherapists to White House strategists. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourself by typing your name and any contact information you'd like to share in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question you'd like to ask them. All comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Let's all use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors. And as I said, my name is Lisa Black. I'm the author of 15 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happens to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, working with my local police department, and I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. So without further ado, we're going to get to these amazingly talented authors. First up, Melissa Marr writes thrillers, fantasy, and paranormal for adults, teens, and children. But her most important job is being a mom to 3 kids at their home in Arizona, along with her partner, Amber. In Pretty Broken Things, 2 different people track a serial killer's only surviving victim to the Big Easy of New Orleans, which inadvertently puts all 3 of them in danger. Now, Melissa's go-to snacks, because we always talk about food and drink on this show, are anything citrus and prickly pear fudge, which she will have to tell us about, and a blood orange martini, which sounded good, so I made one for myself. So, and I think I made it a little strong, so, you know, if I start slurring. So Melissa, tell us about Pretty Broken Things.
Well, Pretty Broken Things is my first adult thriller. For those of you that read my YA, you'll recognize the killer in the book. He was the killer in my YA book, Made for You. So this is my YA killer all grown up. And I actually wrote this one. This is the most, and it's a weird thing to say about a serial killer book, but this is the most autobiographical book I've ever written. Back in my less reputable days, I was romantically involved with a killer. And this was many years later, me coming to terms with the what if. So this is my what if story, what happens when you don't get away. So that sounds really upbeat. It's fine, everything's fine. I'm happy in Arizona, there's plenty of fudge and fruit. So this book is based where I lived at the time in North Carolina and in New Orleans. And during the writing of the book, I spent a lot of time in New Orleans. So I will read you a short snippet. I hate reading, so I apologize if I mutter. I walk outside and feel like a wet blanket hit me. Carolina weather. It's always humid, or at least it feels that way. Murder smells worse in humidity. The scent of things best never smelled gets caught in the wet of the air, and I swear it clings to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I drive to the park. I've hiked here. It's almost 6,000 acres of land with trails, campsites, and lakes. A part of me wants to believe this was a shooting or an accidental death. The logical part of my mind can't quite do that. The park is well traveled enough that there is little chance of death by exposure or animal. A shooting here is likely to have drawn attention. But it's not impossible to be stealthy and shoot or stab someone. The truth is that people are cruel. It's why Uncle Mickey drinks. It's why I check my locks more than once at night. It's also on the long list of reasons why I'm lousy at dating. Better to be single and haunted by my nightmares than to raise a child in this world. I park at Umstead in the lot closest to the crime and get out. I force my steps to be even, my expression neutral, as I walk over to the taped off area. My part-time function in the medical examiner's office means that I have the credentials to get past the police tape, not that I need them today. Jules. Henry nods at me. His eyes take me in like he can read things in my skin and stance. He probably can. I nod back, and just for a moment, I let myself look at him. Henry's young for a detective, the sort of man who has the indeterminate age that could be anywhere from early 30s to late 40s, ex-army, descended from freed slaves, one tattoo, military haircut. He's born Southern, raised Southern, and undoubtedly will die here. He also kisses like a man who enjoys desserts and fine whiskey, savoring each moment. That particular detail is one I shove back in the box where I prefer to keep it. Male or female, I ask, silently hoping it's a man. The creeper doesn't kill men. Woman. Henry's expression is unreadable, even to me. That's not an accident. I slip on my gear. My gloves are purple. Uncle Mickey thought I'd like them better, but they stand out too much, too bright at the edge of death. It's too damn hot to want to wear any of my gear longer than necessary, but contaminating the scene forensically is not an option. Henry looks away as I shimmy into my coveralls. There's nothing improper about it. My clothes stay on under them, but to a lot of Southern men, modesty matters. Respect matters, especially towards women. From behind me, I hear, we aren't making any statements. Officer McAllister glares at the reporter who's craning his neck as if seeing what's behind the black tarp would be wise. Those hanging tarps aren't erected just for the deceased privacy. The tarp hides the sight of what's sure to be awful, yet do nothing for the scent of death. It takes a certain sort of mindset to bury a body here. It means that he, and yes, most killers are men, managed to take his victim into a well-trafficked area. She was either alive and killed on sight, or he carried a dead body into the woods. Both scenarios tell us something about him. I'm only contracted to transport bodies, but after a few years doing this, I couldn't help but learn more about investigations. People talk, and morticians listen better than most people realize.
That was very interesting. I really like that.
Thank you.
And working in Florida, I totally get the humidity at crime scenes issue is, yes, such an issue. I've never had to put on one of those full body Tyvek suits, and I really hope I never have to, because I'm convinced I would just like instantly collapse from heat exhaustion in this heat. So my question was going to be about, why did you set it in New Orleans, and did you get to spend a lot of time there? But you already answered that. So where in New Orleans did you live, and where in New Orleans did you set the book? I mean,
well, I stayed in the Marigny. I stayed in the French Quarter. I stayed in the Central Business District. I moved around to the point of one of my characters lives kind of in a disreputable house. So I rented a place with actual holes in the wall where you could watch people walking by outside. That was, I'm very about immersing. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. And I got to know a lot of the locals over the time I was writing it. So much so that at one point I texted and asked, I have a body, this is where I'm at, where do I want to dump it? And one of my questions wrote back and said, do you need me to send you a guy? So it was super fun and immersive, and also taught me a lot about some interesting New Orleanian characters.
Such as?
Well, that I can call a guy to move a body. I mean,
yeah.
I don't have any friends like that in Arizona.
Yeah. Well, friends help friends move. Real friends help friends move bodies. Know how it is. I read in an interview that you used to like to clear your head while you bake or weave or lie underwater in your bathtub, bringing through a snorkel. Do you still do that? And does that really help? Because I may try it.
It does. I will probably never live that down. I admitted that on a tour event my very first year in 2007. And I think there's something to be said for distracting the mind. And so I like to do physical things. I do the bathtub thing where I block everything out. So it's kind of like a submersion chamber. I practice historical sword fighting. I've broken a few bones doing that. I bake. Just something to distract and move the body. I think is really, it gets me outside of my head, and I think that's important. But the bathtub thing, I swear it works. Every house I buy or rent, I make sure I have a giant slipper tub so I can soak and write. We all have quirks.
We
Yes.
have a question
Mhm.
from LR. What did Melissa research for her book?
For this book?
Mhm.
Well, I literally have walked everywhere that the characters have been. Umstead is where I used to hike. I went through all of the places where she is. I went through part of it. One of the characters is an author. That part's a little easy to research. I have a mortician on speed dial for all of the mortuary scenes, and he read over all of them to make sure that I represented his art, his craft correctly. And I lived with a killer, which was not research at the time, but years later ended up being useful.
Can we ask about that? Or do you not want to talk about it? Or?
No, I mean, I was in my 20s. And at the time, I was putting myself through graduate school, running a biker bar, where you meet interesting people. And I ended up in a relationship with a man who had committed some felonies. And I didn't realize it until I was in the situation. And it was something that took me a minute to come to terms with as an adult. Obviously, it's been a couple decades, and it's easier to look back on it. But when I decided to write and I decided to sit a situation, like, what is the worst thing that can happen from here? And you start thinking, what if I had taken a different path? We all ask that, right? Mm-hmm. So in asking that, I said, well, what if I had stayed? And so this is a story that was about the what if I hadn't left the killer. So the woman we heard from is the mortician, but the other primary character is the woman who was with the serial killer. She's the one they're looking for. So we get her perspective as well as the mortician's perspective. And the author who's exploiting the perspective and the serial killer story, looking for his next bestseller. Because once you've hit that list, you always want it again. And so he's chasing the list and exploiting people to do it.
And there is just a comment for you from Celeste Berteau. I lived in New Orleans for 39 years before moving to New Mexico 2 years ago. No better setting for a crime story or any kind of story. So kudos.
Okay, well, that was very interesting. We're going to move on to our next author, who is Danna, is the exhaustingly prolific author of 3 series involving forensics, canines, or hostage negotiators. In addition to releasing 2 books each year, she also works full-time as researching infectious diseases for a Canadian university. So obviously this year has been an extremely busy year for her. Jen lives near Toronto with her husband and 2 daughters. In Leave No Trace, the FBI canine team tracks through the Blue Ridge Mountains looking for someone who's picking off hunters with a bow and arrow. Jen likes to snack on pesto and sun-dried tomato torta and a brown cow of Kahlua and cream over ice.
It's a classic for a reason.
Yes, it is. It's my sister's favorite drink too.
Yeah.
So tell us about your new book.
Leave No Trace is the 5th book in the FBI Canine series. And the FBI Canine series is set in a real FBI unit, the Forensic Canine Unit. And these particular dogs and handlers are part of the Human Scent Evidence Team. And so this is a real unit inside the FBI. And so because it's an FBI case that we're always looking at, I have the advantage of being able to set it in all sorts of places. So we've had cases that have been set on the Eastern Seaboard. We've had cases that have been set in West Virginia. And in this case, we've gone into the mountains of Georgia, the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is a gorgeous area. But because of this, the actual area that the story is set in almost becomes a character to itself, because this is a very treacherous area. Lots of mountains, lots of rivers, lots of wildlife. And so what's happening in this particular story, when the story starts, a Georgia State police officer has been murdered. And because it's a Georgia State police officer, it gets bumped up to the next level, which means that it's an FBI case. When Special Agent Torres gets this case, he realizes that because these are wilderness searches that are going to be happening, there's somebody who's shooting people with a bow and arrow and then ghosting into the trees, that he needs a dog team or dog teams. And so he goes up a level and contacts the Forensic Canine Unit, and they send out a couple of teams. The protagonist in this story is Meg Jennings. She's an ex-Richmond PD patrol canine officer who unfortunately lost her German Shepherd in a suspect takedown. The dog was shot and killed. And she pulls out of the Richmond PD and goes home to her parents' rescue, where she happens to bond with a very sick black lab puppy. And she nurses the black lab puppy back to health, and that is Hawk, who becomes her search and rescue canine. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book. This is right at the very beginning, right when the Georgia State Police officer's body has been found, and they are looking to find out what kind of situation they're looking at this particular time. So we're going to see Meg Jennings and her canine Hawk, as well as one of the other dog teams, Brian Foster and his German Shepherd, Lacey. At the beginning of this scene, they're meeting with a circle of law enforcement officers, because all different levels have been called in because it was a police officer who was killed. I responded to the call at 0750 this morning. When I arrived here at the house, I found Sergeant Hubbard down on the hill lying in the grass. Officer Howard pointed down the slope to a grassy area cordoned off with police tape. The crimson stain drenching the grass was unmistakable. Sergeant Hubbard was already deceased. At first glance, the entry wound looked like it was from a rifle, but Mrs. Hubbard said she didn't hear a shot. That's when I realized it was an arrow strike. But I couldn't find the arrow until I put together that he was hit when he was about to get in his car up here on the driveway. The arrow passed clean through his body, and he fell and rolled downhill. So where's the... Brian cut himself off as he turned to look behind, only to spot the arrow embedded in the tree. Holy! His voice trailed off as he studied the arrow. That thing must be close to 3 feet long, and it passed through him? Brian's tone radiated the horror that Meg felt. Yes, depending on the draw weight, the amount of force behind an arrow, especially one with that kind of arrowhead, is significant, said Fannin County Sheriff Don Maxwell. It would also leave a hole several inches wide behind because it's a mechanical, expandable arrowhead. Meaning, Brian prompted. When the arrow is shot, the blades of an expanding broadhead are folded back so the arrow is aerodynamic, but when it hits the target, the mechanical blades snap out, slicing through anything in the way. Remember, an arrow spins as it flies, so it would be like getting hit by a 3-inch high-speed drill. It would simply carve a tunnel through soft tissue. Brian shuddered. Hawk, come. Meg strode to the tree and studied the arrow. Neither of us are hunters. Can someone tell us what we're looking at? It might give us some insight into the suspect. This here's a custom-made carbon fiber arrow, Captain Wilcox began. You can tell that just by looking at it, Meg asked. Sure, I can tell you these components are top of the line, and most arrows, certainly all the commercial ones, only have 3 fletchings. This one has 4. That gives the shooter an advantage, makes the arrow quieter, and with 4 vanes, you can make each one lower profile, which minimizes wind drift, gives the arrow extra stability. Like if you're making an extra long distance shot and you want to ensure accuracy, Brian asked, and you don't want your target to hear the arrow coming? Wilcox nodded. That's right. Granted, at 300 feet per second on an average 70-pound draw, even if you hear it coming, you won't have time to get out of the way. Meg turned and followed the path the arrow must have flown over the hollow behind the house and over the rise as it climbed up the mountain. Can you estimate where the shot came from? Based on the direction of the arrow, I'd put the shooter... Wilcox extended an arm and pointed toward a small open space inside the forest line. Right about there. He squinted at the spot, glanced at the arrow, and then returned his gaze to the tree line. That must be about 100 yards, maybe a little more. He swiveled back to face Meg and Brian. We're talking about an expert shot. You are going to need to be extremely careful. If you get within 300 feet of him, that'll be all he needs to take you out permanently. That's the end of chapter 1.
Well, that's very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm from Ohio, and my ex-brother-in-law used to bow hunt.
Okay.
It's, yeah, so they bows can be extraordinarily dangerous.
and extraordinarily precise.
Oh, yes, true.
Yeah, yeah. I did some fun research for this book. I went to a local Bass Pro Shop. My son-in-law is sort of like the hunter camper in the family, and so he took me out to this Bass Pro Shop, and we were talking to the archery, sort of rep who was there. And I explained to him that I was an author and what I was doing, and the materials I needed, and I needed to figure out distance and all of this kind of stuff. And he showed me all this stuff, but he seemed kind of, a little bit reticent about it. And the next day I got an email from him saying, "Hey, I looked you up. You really are an author." So no, I wasn't actually trying to kill somebody.
It's always good to establish. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Your book sounds like a true crime case that occurred when I lived in Cleveland. Over a 3-year period, Thomas Dillon killed 5 hunters in southern Ohio with a gun, not a bow. But like your book, at first they were considered hunting accidents, and then finally people, the authorities realized
enough bodies
that,
piled up that it's not a hunting accident.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was 1989 to 92.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard? Did you hear that case?
No,
or-
I hadn't heard of that case.
Probably no one outside Ohio heard of it, but
Okay.
it was fascinating because it was just before I got into forensics, so I was fascinated. I wanted to write about it, but this Akron Beacon Journal author, writer, journalist wound up getting a book deal with the guy because he was sending her. They started to communicate, and he was sending her letters when he was in prison and everything else. So it really developed a strange story.
Yeah.
So you like Doug and Link, you also work with a co-author, Amy Vanderlyn. So how did you two decide? How did you decide to co-write?
Well, we've been writing together for years, and originally it started, we met in kind of a funny way. I was writing and just posting stuff online, was just sort of having fun. I'd been in my lab job for 15 years. I was getting bored. I just sort of started playing for fun. And I'm Canadian, and we're sort of big on gun control up here. And I made a dumb error with a gun, and she was a Texan who knew guns well, and she corrected me in the error, and that started the conversation. And then we got to the point where we started sort of planning things out together. And so that's still the process that we use now. We do all of the brainstorming and all of the character creation together. And then I do 100% of the drafting, and then we edit it together, like rip it apart and then put it back together again together. So that's sort of I'm very interested to hear how Lincoln and Doug work, because that's how Anne and I work together. And it's every partnership has a slightly different way of doing it, but we've written, 11 books together this way. So it works for us.
That's great. Yeah, it's common knowledge. It's like, don't ever make a mistake with a gun in a book, because you will get 8,000, emails from readers saying, that's why I tend to avoid them on the whole. And if I do have to use a gun, I just mention it very briefly, And it's always a Glock 40, because at the police department, that's what everyone uses. Even though I live with like an expert on guns. If there was anything I could possibly need to know, I could ask him. So let's move on to Doug and Lincoln and find out how they work together. I'm going to give them a little intro first. I find it comforting to know that writers can come out of deadly boring suburbs, because I definitely came from one. And Douglas Preston says that growing up in Wellesley, Massachusetts was deadly boring. He began his career in New York as a writer-editor at the American Museum of Natural History. And does that make everyone as jealous as it makes me? In writing a nonfiction book, he met editor Lincoln Child, who thought that the museum would make a fabulous setting for a thriller. And the rest is history. Now, Lincoln Child is from Connecticut and made his way to the Big Apple to find his first adult, real job as an editorial assistant at St. Martin's. Now, again, must control envy. He worked his way up to editor and founded the company's mass market horror division. He met Doug, left St. Martin's to work in systems analysis at MetLife, and then Relic was published. In his books Written Alone, his character investigates occurrences that defy explanation involving deaths at a think tank or a state park or even a matchmaking service. And that character is Jeremy Logan, and I have some more questions about him later. But for the moment, we're going to talk about The Scorpion's Tale, their new book, in which new FBI agent Cory Swanson brings along archaeologist Nora Kelly to identify a mummy found in a New Mexico ghost town, only to discover the victim's gruesome death alongside a priceless 16th century Spanish cross. Nora Kelly, their character, likes to snack on chili peppers roasted over an open fire, paired with a shot of Casa Noble Anejo. Agent Pendergrass's drink, of course, is a little more precise, a precisely made gin martini with a twist of lemon, but I didn't have lemon, so I used a lime. And since Doug and Link did not want the job of reading from their own book, here is rogue Chris Goff to give us a taste of their new novel.
Hey, great. I'm reading from the first chapter, but I want to give a little preview because I started into the chapter. So Special Agent Cory Swanson is an 8th-month graduate of the FBI Academy. Hold on just a second, everybody. I just have to be ready to have this do right. So a supervisory special agent, Hale Morwood, is her boss. They have just come from serving a warrant on an 18-year-old kid who hacked into the Los Alamos National Laboratory just for fun. Neither one of them think the kid is a criminal, but he's facing really serious charges. Cory hasn't spent much time in the field. So Morwood uses the time in the car as a teaching opportunity, and he's talking about how he still believes in the criminal justice system. So Cory's really impressed by his lack of cynicism. And then a call comes over the radio, and it's a domestic dispute at a campground nearby. Shots fired. Maury instructs her to check her weapon. They're first responders. These calls are dangerous. He tells her what to expect and then asks her about how well she shoots. And she tells him she barely shoots well enough to qualify. So pulling up to the camper, they can see a man inside the screened-in living area holding a child in a hammerlock gun to her head. As Morwood engages the man in conversation, they slip out of the truck and take positions. Cory can see the man's chest heaving, and she heard the rasp of his breath. And then she noticed blood was draining out the door and running in rivulets down the camper step into the dirt below. "You see the blood?" Morwood asked. "Yes." Her heart was in her throat. The guy had shot someone inside the camper already. "Sir, we're going to ask you to release the hostage. Let the child leave. As soon as you do that, we can talk. We'll listen to what you have to say and work things out." The man pulled the gun from the girl's head and fired twice at them. Both rounds missed the truck entirely. "I've been shot at before," Cory thought. "I can handle this. Besides, he can't aim." Morwood spoke again, his voice steady. "Please let the child leave. If there's anything you need from me in order to do that, tell me." "I don't need shit from you," the man suddenly screamed, so full of rage and gargling hysteria that the words were hardly intelligible. "I'm gonna kill her. I'm fucking gonna kill her right now." The child began to scream. "Shut the fuck up." Morwood continued to speak, steady but firm. "Sir, you are not going to kill a child. Is she your daughter?" "She's the bitch's daughter, and I'm gonna kill her right now." Cory saw him raise the gun and fired 2 more shots toward them, one of which slammed into the truck's rear side. Then the man pressed the gun back to the child's head. "She's gonna die. Count of 3. The girl's tiny, terrified scream sounded like a metal blade cutting through tin. "No," she choked out. "Please, Uncle, no." 1. Morwood turned to Cory and spoke quietly and rapidly. "I'm authorizing deadly force. I'm going to the right to get a single angle on him. Cover me. If you get a clear shot, I mean absolutely clear, take it, sir." 2. The Glock felt like a block of heavy, wet plastic in her trembling hand. "Calm down and focus, for fuck's sake." She peered over the hood and then took a low shooting stance, bracing her arms. It exposed her, but the guy couldn't aim worth shit. She repeated it in her head. "The guy can't aim worth shit." She carefully drew a bead on the man's head and placed her finger lightly on the trigger. He was holding the girl in front of him, and 10 yards was too far for a positive shot. Morwood bolted from behind the truck and scrambled to a pinyon tree 30 feet to the right, throwing himself down into a prone shooting position. Cory kept the man square in her sights. A headshot at this distance with her Glock 19M was still way too risky for the child. She glanced to her left and noted that Cory and Martinez were behind their SUVs, guns trained. Now she could hear the faint sirens of the SWAT team coming up the road. Thank God they were almost there. 3. Morwood fired his weapon, but Cory instantly understood it was a decoy shot to distract the man, stop him from shooting the girl. And distract him it did. He pulled the gun from the girl's head and returned fire, 2 wild shots. And in that moment, the girl twisted away and broke free of his grasp, lunging for the door, but slipping and falling short. In that moment, the man was isolated, alone, and perfectly silhouetted against the netting. The girl was on the floor. Cory had the men dead in her sights. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked and the round missed the headshot she was aiming for, smacked into his right shoulder instead. The hit spun him to the side. He swung his weapon around to return fire, but was off balance and aiming wildly. Cory saw the flash and the kick of the weapon just as the girl scrambled up, grabbing at the flimsy door of the camper. She tumbled down the steps to the ground, pigtails whirling, Princess Leia hair clips flying. That's the end.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'm not going to read that book. That's too violent. You know, somehow when you write it, it's a little different than when you hear it being read and read so effectively.
It is different.
Like seeing yourself on TV. It's very painful the first time, no matter how well you made up or how well you read about. But thank
So this scene obviously introduces Cory, but the book takes place with her and Nora Kelly investigating this mummy found in New Mexico, right? And as we discuss in my line of work, that when a body dies, it'll do one of two things. In a human environment, it will decompose. In a very dry environment, it will desiccate or mummify. So is the mummy in your book, the body mummified because of the natural surroundings or because it was purposely mummified, turned into a mummy?
It's naturally mummified. And the way that in the next few chapters, I'm not giving away any spoilers here, but what happens is you have a sheriff, the sheriff of Socorro County, there's only one for a very large county, surprises a looter digging in this very remote ghost town called High Lonesome. And they get in a shootout. Neither one are killed, but each one takes a bullet. And it turns out this looter was digging up this naturally mummified human body in the basement of this ruined house in this ghost town. But the body's not as old as the ghost town. It's only 50 to 75 years old, and it's in a very fragile state. It's dry, it's desiccated, but it's really falling apart. And so Cory, who's just this young FBI agent, is given what seems like a throwaway case to look at the body, to identify it, to see if it's a homicide or an accident or something else. Cory, by the way, has a degree in forensic anthropology from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, so a degree she got before she went to the academy. So she, in inspecting this body in the basement, realizes that it's very delicate and it's really going to require professional excavation techniques. So she brings in Nora Kelly, who's this archaeologist that she worked with before. They don't really get along that well, but she needs the help, and she doesn't want to bring in the FBI evidence response team because she doesn't even know if it's a homicide yet. So she doesn't want to be embarrassed and inconvenience the team, and she's just an 8-month graduate. So anyway, I should probably turn it over to Link to go to take it from there.
Well, Lisa, do you have any questions you'd like to ask us?
Yeah, tell us about this 16th century gold cross. Is this based on a real item, a real artifact?
As a matter of fact, it is. Doug, enlighten them. He's all over this book because it's set in his backyard. You know, he rode on horseback throughout the Jornada del Muerto, across Los Alamos and the White Sands Missile Range. So this is really his meat, and I'm going to stand aside most uncharacteristically and let him talk for a change.
Well, yeah, that's right. Passing the buck. Well, it is. The story is based on a true story of a very unusual treasure, a legend of a treasure buried in New Mexico called the Victorio Peak treasure. You can go on Wikipedia and read about it. And it's a very interesting treasure story because in 1933, this guy named Doc Noss claimed to have discovered this treasure in an area that would soon become the White Sands Missile Range and was closed to human entry. So no one has been able to, spend the time necessary, or so they think, to recover the treasure. And there are all kinds of rumors that the military got involved and took the treasure out and so on and so forth. And so it's a fascinating story about a buried treasure that's never been resolved. And so Lincoln and I talked about this and we brainstormed and we came up with a really interesting twist on this idea, which I can't tell you because that is a spoiler. And that's where the novel sort of came from.
Very interesting. I do have a question for Lincoln about your other book series of the many. I'm reading The Forgotten Room right now, so I wanted to know where the inspiration for Jeremy Logan came from. I mean, were you just picturing this character who's like a cross between Agent Pendergast and Indiana Jones, or was it more from the effect of working at the Natural History Museum and being surrounded all day by these items and stories that have fascinated people for hundreds and thousands of years? I mean, I started to think it's like, why do we still talk about vampires? Why do we never get tired of those stories that, come from folk tales and history?
I think it dates back to about when I was 8, when I moved from Edgar Allan Poe to Lovecraft and permanently warped myself. Luckily, Clyde Barker wasn't around at the time, or I wouldn't be speaking to you now. But I developed a love of horror and suspense and ghost stories from a very early age. And in particular, a lot of the more obscure ones, the ones that are published by Ghost Story Press or Ash Street Press, or small presses like that. And I became particularly interested in what they used to call ghost breakers or supernatural sleuths, which were very popular in the pulp magazine days and earlier. Where either they would actually there'd be a real ghost potentially, like the Loch Ness Monster, for example, or it might just be a fake ghost, as in Speckled Band, the home story, where it's not something really odd, it's just a snake. And he's been dead 100 years, so that's not a spoiler. And so I thought I would create a character like that, and who would solve mysteries or bizarre occurrences that nobody else could explain, whether they be, again, the Loch Ness Monster, or they be a body that's found in a locked room, a la John Dixon Carr, but with supernatural overtones, because nobody else believed in that kind of thing. So I wanted to have the ghost breaker apparatus with modern day science and a healthy dose of cynicism. And so he calls himself an enigmologist. And I thought I made that term up until I ran into the guy who edits the New York Times crosswords, and turns out he got a degree in enigmatology, I think is the word, which is solving of puzzles. But my character Jeremy is the only enigmologist, and I'll fight anybody who says otherwise.
So everyone wants to know, or more than one person wants to know, what is your process for writing books together?
Well, it's
I do all the work and Doug takes all the credit. That's the easiest.
You know how they say in a writing partnership, each partner does 75% of the work. The way we work together is, our way of working together has evolved a little bit. So I'll describe how we do it now. Basically, we brainstorm a story. One of us will come up with a central idea. And in the case of the Scorpion's Tale, it happened to be my idea, but in the next book we're writing, the Pendergast book, it was Lincoln's idea. But one of us comes up with an idea, we brainstorm it. There's a very long journey, as any writer knows, from an idea to a plot. And then we write together a narrative outline of the book, not too long. And then we start plotting out chapters. We might plot 15 chapters ahead, 20 chapters. And then we divide up the chapters. Lincoln will take one thread of chapters, maybe from one character's point of view. I'll take another thread. And we each write our sets of chapters, and then we swap them. And then this is when things get difficult. This is when Lincoln takes my Shakespearean level prose and butchers it. And this is when I have to take Lincoln's, leaden, dull prose and liven it up. And so, of course, there are arguments and we've had to ban the use of a document compare. We work on a Dropbox document. And when Link rewrites my work, I don't know what he's done. All I know is the end result. And the same is true with him. We've long ago stopped, using document compare or the track changes or anything.
Track changes.
And then, we argue. And as I think Lincoln mentioned, it's like a bad marriage.
And at the end, I run kind of a literary Zamboni over the whole thing and clean it up. And then we send it off to our editor for yet another excoriation.
Yes. We don't get excoriated by our editor. We get
Are very, very nice to us.
Once we got like a 25-page single-spaced editorial letter. And I really thought at that point that both of us were just going to ride off into the sunset and give up.
Well, that was my karma, because I once wrote a 30-page editorial letter, and I feel really bad for the guy that I never heard from him again. So,
But
I
usually
love that word, excoriated.
Yes. That's how it feels. It really is. Yeah, my very first book was an 8-page single-spaced letter. So, now I see that wasn't that bad.
When I switched from my mysteries to thrillers, I had a 10-page single-spaced.
Now, these days, we're just thrilled if an editor gives us that much time. Can't take that.
we have a wonderful editor at Hachette, of Wes Miller, who is really terrific, and he does not write 30-page editorial letters, but he manages to say quite a bit even in a short letter, but it's always good.
He writes an iambic pentameter, which really helps, to condense the comments he has.
With a trochee thrown in for good measure here and there.
Well, we have 18 people in the room, and I'm sure some of them have questions. So maybe we could let them unmute if they're polite about it and ask some questions if they have them. Anybody?
One just came in. How long does it take you typically from start to finish?
Is
Doug
directed at,
and Doug and Link. How long does?
Most of the other people, other authors here, including you, would say we're usually working on 2 or 3 books at the same time. So it's kind of hard to say exactly, but I would say from the first call, hey Doug, what do you think of this idea, to the last view of the 3rd pass of page proofs, about 18 months. But meanwhile, there's other books going on at various different, there's a paperback coming out of one, there's a hardcover coming out of another one, there's the TV series that nobody wanted to do, we'll make, that we get cry about, and there's always a lot going on at once, like a fugue.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time complaining about things, and this year we've had a lot to complain about. We haven't seen each other either. All our work has been long distance. I have to stay away from Lincoln. He's COVID central, really.
At least I'm about 50 miles away from you, up I-75.
Yes. Yeah.
There's
No, I just,
there's a question for all of the authors. Melissa and Sara chime in here. For any of you, how different is it to write a standalone compared with series?
Well, I'll answer that first. It's really lonely to write a standalone novel. It's very stressful, and you find at least personally, I find myself going down the wrong road sometimes for weeks and have to throw away a lot of material. Whereas when I'm working with Lincoln, if I start going down the wrong road, he's right there. Whoa, brother, holy, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing? And he brings me back onto the path. So it's nice working with Lincoln. I really enjoy it. I do write nonfiction books by myself. I wrote The Lost City, The Monkey God, but that's a different kind of writing. That's very different from a novel. Much more structured
That's
process.
easier.
Well, you also wrote one of my favorite, Doug, was the one set in Florence.
the monster of Florence.
Monster of Florence. When I was 1975, I backpacked Europe and we stayed in Florence. We were camping outside of Florence during that time, and they told us to be careful.
Wow. Well,
It's the
I was
book.
at
I have a question.
the cover that was banned in Albuquerque.
Really?
Look at people.
Lisa, I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Doug and Link, not during this COVID time, but generally over the years, how do you guys market your books? I mean, do you go like the two of you on, book tours all over the place in bookstores and to speak to groups, or do you take like Doug gets one kind of group and Lincoln talks to another kind of group? What's your marketing strategy?
Well, like Doug said, that also has evolved over the years. I hate to fly, and so generally in the past we've always done an event in New York City. We both have places nearby, and that's like to kick off the tour. And then generally Doug will take the West Coast, I'll take the East Coast. Once they had us on one of those huge buses that the people on campaigns take. But I think that bankrupted our publisher. That hasn't happened again. And often, thanks to the miracle of Zoom and Skype, now I can be dialed into Doug when he's in the Antipodes someplace doing a book signing. But generally, we have a couple of events. And since I'm in Florida now, and we've never done that part of the country before, the last two books, which were set in Florida, we've done road trips basically to 8 or 10 cities in the state. But that ended, of course, when the last book was published in January.
What about around the world? I mean, you're published in different languages.
Doug?
Do you go other places?
Yes, Doug's, I think he's on Italy and France, haven't you, at least?
Italy, France, Holland, and Germany. Those are the places I've gone to on book tours. It's really fun. The French book tour was particularly fun. It was great. But another thing we do, Karna, is we, a long time ago, I was talking to Lee Child after he published his first best-selling book. And I said, Lee, how did you do it? Because we were still Lincoln and I were still struggling. And he said, I started a newsletter. I started sending out a newsletter once a month and collecting email addresses. So we started doing that, and now we have 120,000 newsletter subscribers. And we email them when a book is published. The Scorpion's Tale is going to be published tomorrow. So at midnight tonight, we have an email going out saying, buy our book, buy our book. Actually, it's more sophisticated than that. But it really is really important. It notifies everybody that our book's out. Most of the time with our newsletters, we try to entertain our readers. We don't try to sell them, or push anything, but we do push it once a year.
We get so many newsletters ourselves from all different kinds of businesses that we try and make ours as entertaining and as least, sounding like a marketing mailer as possible. a short story you can only get on the newsletter or information or a contest or whatever it might be.
Well, we're going to have to check that out. Rogue Women Writers, we're working on our newsletter. I had a question for Melissa. What would you say is like the difference between adult reader fans and your young adult fans?
I don't think there's a huge difference between the adult and young adult. Some of my young adult books, like in my German publication of my first book and Australian, they both came out for adult readers, even though it was YA here in the States. So I have a lot of crossover with my YA. But my picture book, I do picture books, and those are with Penguin, and then middle grade with both Penguin and Hachette. And those are great because you don't have to do newsletters and you don't have to do marketing because you can't market directly to them. So in some ways, it's a lot easier from the marketing perspective, and from the events perspective. Like you, I've done the Italian and the English and some of the overseas tours, and they're great, but they're adults, right? So I don't have to worry about my language. I don't have to worry about making sure that I'm being careful in the ways that I have to do for young readers. So I think the young readers is primarily simply that I don't have to worry about some of the marketing. Publisher does all that. And for the adult stuff, I actually have to talk to people, which is altogether different. I have to do the tours and the travel and the Zooms and and it gets exhausting, as I'm sure you all know.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. And I did have one more question for Jen about you work researching infectious diseases. Have you used that before COVID, other than COVID? Have you ever used that in a book?
I haven't actually. I'm kind of the opposite of you, where you take your day job and do just a lot more of it in fiction. I kind of made that decision to sort of make the break. Too much of a good thing, maybe you kind of lose your love of it. And it would be just a really long day. And I'm especially glad of that now, because as a COVID researcher running 2 randomized clinical national trials, I would not want to do that all day and all night. So.
And besides, probably within the next year, it looks like every single novel that comes out is going to be relating to a pandemic situation. So
maybe.
Let's hope.
I don't know. I think people might be getting kind of tired of it. I'm not sure there's going to be a big push in that direction. I know I'm leaving it out of mine. I think we've all had enough of it. Yeah.
Me too. That's how I feel.
Jen, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Will you please inoculate me?
Do I believe in the vaccinations?
Will you please inoculate me?
Oh, will I please inoculate you? If I could get it myself, I would be happy to do so. We're running trials, but not around vaccinations. We're running trials around infectivity. Sorry.
All right. Just kidding.
And also, Doug, to jump around in topics here for a minute, I did also want to ask Doug and Link, your inspiration for Nora Kelly, I believe, came from Lincoln's grandmother named Nora, who was an archaeologist. And I think Doug's aunt was also an archaeologist. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's true. My grandmother was an amateur archaeologist. She worked on the digs at Camelot and in Masada and a few other places, doing a lot of the art for them and the reconstructive art.
Wow. And
so Nora Kelly was named after her. And Doug and I are both fascinated by archaeology. I was fascinated since I wandered as a high school student, I wandered onto a Dartmouth student dig of an old colonial cabin, and they let me come on one day as an 11th grader, and I just dug around listlessly, and I happened to come across the front door lock, which is what they've been looking for 3 or 4 weeks. So they were very annoyed at me for coming on, and ever since then, it's like winning a huge pot on the first roll of the dice. I've been fascinated ever since, and as has Doug.
Did you have an archaeologist that you guys worked with in New Mexico? I ask because my daughter's an archaeologist anchored at UNM.
Oh,
Do
is
you have
that-
an archaeologist there that you're working with? for your
Well, I have archaeological friends. I live in Santa Fe part of the year, and I have a number of friends there who are archaeologists. And so when I have a question about something, I'll give them a call and ask them, what do you think about this, or what would an archaeologist do about that? So it's a kind of a group of people. It
Excellent.
isn't a single person.
Excellent.
Always good.
The person I
Did- What?
was just going to say, Tim Maxwell is one of the archaeologists who's given me a lot of great information. He used to be the state archaeologist. He's now retired.
Hmm. Did you say something about a dig at Camelot?
Camelot Cadbury, yes. I mean, at the time it was thought in the 60s that may be the site of what has in fabulous fiction been known as Camelot, but it turned out not to be.
So not like where King Arthur lived.
Well, it would have been nice, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't find him sleeping, so no. Apparently,
Hmm. Okay. Well. And Doug, I do also have to ask you about what was the best and worst maybe parts of traveling 1,000 miles on horseback to retrace Coronado's route. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, that was a crazy, stupid thing to do. I was very ignorant when I started that trip. I was going to do a book, which actually was published, called Cities of Gold. And so I retraced 1,000 miles of Coronado's route through the Southwest, through Arizona and New Mexico on horseback as a complete dude. But, my partner and I, we nearly starved to death. We ran out of water. We lost our horses. We were injured. I mean, it was crazy. There are a lot of bad things happened. Although I ended up losing some 40 pounds. I was so skinny. I was at the end of the trip because we'd run out of food and there was no place to get food. We were riding cross country. We weren't following any trails or roads or anything and not going through towns. So it was, we went for like 2 weeks on very low rations.
Didn't you try to like detour to a town or something like that? I mean,
Well, we could have, riding 20 or 30 or 40 miles out of our way, but
hmm.
the idea of doing that and having to ride back was just even worse than the idea of starving to death.
Oh
We were
my
really
gosh.
to get where we were going. It took us 10 weeks of riding and sleeping out in the desert and finding water, and it was really a tough journey. But I was quite a bit younger then, so.
and he got home just in time because on the night before they got to civilization, he woke up to find his partner salting his leg.
How did you lose the horses and how did you get them back?
Well, we had 4 horses, 2 for packing and 2 for riding. And you're crossing the desert. There are areas where there are no trees, no place to tie a horse. Also, the horses had to be able to graze at night because you couldn't just tie them up. They couldn't eat during the daytime. And horses take a long time to graze. And also the grass was very sparse. So they had to go quite a distance. So we had to hobble them. And sometimes they would go miles while they were hobbled. So so we put a cowbell on the lead horse and we get up in the morning and we listen, and sometimes you could hear that cowbell ringing a mile off. But there were times when we were in storms and the horses broke their hobbles and ran off, and then we had to track them. I mean, you're literally on your hands and knees, before sunrise, trying to follow these damn tracks, going for miles and miles. I mean, it was unbelievable. Sometimes it took us days to find our horses.
Melissa, I have a question for you. You said that you write adult, children's, and middle grade?
Yep.
Right. So I have picture books. I ended up writing those. When I adopted my son, we were in the hospital. So I ended up writing those because I didn't have a book to read. And we were in the hospital for a month and a half. And so I wrote the picture book kind of by accident. But then it did well, so I wrote more. And the middle grade, I wrote for my now adult son. And so it's basically, you know, I read all genres, I read all age groups, so it doesn't make sense to limit myself, which is an argument I have regularly with my agent, who would prefer for me to be branded. But it's not what works for me. So.
And how about you, Sara? You write different books too, completely different books, right?
Yeah, they're all police procedurals, but one is sort of, you know, I'm a scientist, so my sort of scientific series is the Abbott and Lowell Forensic Mysteries, which is around forensic anthropology. And then I write the FBI Canine series. And then my newest series is the NYPD Negotiators, which is around the hostage negotiation team within the NYPD. So they're all adult, they're all police procedurals, but yeah, they are sort of in different sort of subgenres within that group.
So everybody, all of you are writing, Doug and Link both write different things, plus then they write 2 different series. It wasn't their series together. So interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're out of questions unless anyone has any last minute ones. And I'd like to thank our 4 authors for being here. This was a wonderful event tonight. This was really a lot of fun. It was so great to meet you, even if it's only virtually. And we will definitely send you the link to the recording for this. And we have been live on Facebook. And of course, it will be on our YouTube channel and accessible through our website as well.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you for coming.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Nice to
Thanks
see
so
you.
much for coming.
Thank you.